So this is our first Fireside chat. It's a panel hosted by Inclusion, which is a special interest group of ACSP for their LGBTQIA plus allies members. And the topic for today's discussion is navigating home, queer aging in place. So this panel will discuss creative tactics that older queer adults are using to age with power in their home communities. Speakers will discuss their lived experiences around queer aging, as well as their advocacy and scholarship that address the ways in which housing and home communities can contribute to older queer adults feelings of comfort and safety. So that is broadly the description of the panel, and we have a really fine lineup of speakers who bring in their lived experiences as well as a variety of advocacy and scholarship work to the discussions. So I'm going to briefly introduce myself that I forgot to do. My name is Manish Chalana. I am based in the University of Washington in Seattle. I'm an associate professor in urban design and planning. I am also the chair of Inclusion, the special interest group that I just mentioned. Having introduced myself, I'll quickly introduce the panelists. Our first panelist is Portia Cantrell. She is a retired trauma nurse and now lives in Dallas, Texas. So she's joining us from Dallas, Texas, and she moved there from Chicago. In Dallas, she's engaged in numerous civic and outreach activities, including the mayor's LGBT task force, the Dallas Senior Task Force, and was also appointed as the Dallas Municipal Library Board Commissioner, and is a member of Diversity and Inclusion Committee for the Alzheimer's Association, and also a member of Senior Advisory Board for Texas Congresswoman Eddie Johnson. Portia is also a state certified cultural competency trainer. There's a lot more that Portia has done, but for the interest of time, I will leave it at that. Portia lives with her wife, Tanya, I'm presuming in Dallas, and they've been together for 20 years, and they live together in Dallas. Our next speaker is Sharon Raphael. She's a professor emerita of sociology. She's taught at Cal State University, Dominic Hill. She is a feminist activist from 1971 onward, continues to do that work. She, along with Mina Meyer, laid the groundwork for the organization Older Lesbians Organizing for Change. And she lives with her spouse, Jenny, and their dog in Long Beach, California. Finally, our third panelist is Marissa Tereski. She just recently received her PhD in urban planning and development from the University of Southern California with a graduate certificate in gender and sexuality studies. She examines how identity, power, and culture lead people to experience urban housing and services differently across their lifespans. Her recent project, Locating Lesbian Lives, builds new insights into ways lesbians navigate loneliness, health, and safety as they navigate in place. So with that, I'm just gonna open up the discussion with one question, and then I'll let the conversations flow. Just a couple of ground rules. Let me see if there's anyone in waiting in the waiting room. Okay, yeah. So if you're not talking, please ensure that you are muted. And then also, uh, it's a small enough group, so we'll have a Q&A session in the end. But in the meanwhile, if you have any questions for our panelists, make use of the chat box, and I'll keep an eye out on the chat box. Uh, uh, so what I'll do is I have a set of questions for the panelists. I'll open up with the first question, and the panel is scheduled for about 90 minutes. So we need to wrap it up before noon Pacific time. My first question is just a very general question uh, that I want to begin the panel with is, what are some of the older LGBTQ plus adults' unique needs for aging in place that you want people to know about, and for planners and policymakers to have a better understanding to allow this community to age with dignity and power, as you say, in place. So I would like for you to bring in your own personal experiences with aging in place, or from others in your community, and any barriers you want to note. So it's a very open-ended question. So I'll begin with Portia, then Marissa, and then Sharon, and then in the next question we'll rotate the sequencing of responses. So did everybody get the question?
Yes.
Okay. All right, Portia, you can begin.
Yes.
Okay. I'd also like to add that I am a Senior Affairs Commissioner here in the city of Dallas. And we are currently, this is a battle that we're fighting, that I am fighting, about the needs and addressing the unique needs of LGBTQ seniors here in Dallas. We definitely have issues with healthcare as we are aging. So we don't want to be living out. We need to remain close to the healthcare centers, the medical districts. So transportation is always a problem. So we are fighting to have housing built in an area that's central to the hospitals, the major hospitals. And you asked about the unique needs. Well, we're not able to get to, if we don't have our car, and as we get older, we're not driving. So we're not able to get to the grocery stores the way we used to. We're not able to get to our doctor's offices for procedures if we have to take 2 trains or something like that. So that's something that's very, very high on the list of priority. Also, we run the risk of becoming isolated as we age. So one thing I'm fighting for very strongly is an LGBTQ senior center here in Dallas. As our friends move or die off or move into assisted living, so many of us are not religious. We've had issues with organized religion. So we need places where we can meet and connect with people that we have a shared history with. And also some place that takes into consideration our age. So going to a restaurant where the music is so loud that we can't have a decent conversation with each other, or going to a bar. And as a matter of fact, even the number of bars, gay bars, are decreasing. And the ones that are here are catering more towards the younger folk. So it's so packed that when I go into one, if I can get a bartender's attention, and that's usually by waving a $10 bill. Hey, see me, see me. But it's so dark and so crowded, I feel I'm gonna fall and trip and break a hip. So we need spaces and places that we can meet that are taking into consideration our hearing, our vision, our mobility issues, and also someplace where we can meet with people, I'm not saying exclusively gay, but that is inclusive enough that people know if they come there and they're not gay, that they will run into and be a part of a gathering that is LGBTQ, and they don't have to look down on us or feel like we're invading their space.
Marissa, you want to go next? Before
Yeah. Thanks for laying that out, Portia. I think that was, I loved how you kind of broke everything down into some really key concepts in aging in place of the transit, housing, and these gathering spaces are kind of the main sites, I think, to really be talking about. And so I talked with about 29 older lesbians for my dissertation work. I recorded oral histories of theirs around who are residing around Los Angeles County, and they're aging in place. And I just want to kind of layer a few things onto what Portia's already said. And so I think, like, when it comes to transit, some things that I heard that I think are unique also to older queer adults' needs. There's someone I talked with who is the main caretaker for her friend and landlord who has early onset dementia, and she's really struggling with the care burden, and it makes her house itself feel like a trap because she's just kind of drowning in this burden, and she wants to go to, there's a vibrant, unlike Dallas, there's a vibrant LGBT center in Los Angeles, and they have all these services for informal caregivers who are older, who are queers, and there's a really great kind of there are great programs for that. But Laura doesn't drive on the freeways, and so as a result, she lives a couple neighborhoods over from West Hollywood, the historic gay neighborhood where the LGBT center is located. And so because she doesn't drive, she can't attend these caregiving meetings. And so instead, she goes to the senior center in her local neighborhood. But she feels a bit isolated there because she feels like, people, as Portia said, don't understand kind of don't have that shared history, and she can't be completely honest with them. So I think, there is definitely a need, for more of the, even if there is one kind of anchor institution as Gaziani talks about with the LGBT center in LA, right? They just opened their first satellite LGBT center in South LA, which is really exciting, in a historic gay neighborhood that's in Leimert Park, which is really a great step forward. But having more of the kind of dispersing these services to make them more accessible, because it's so difficult. And then when it comes to housing, the stories that really got me interested in studying aging and the queer community in the first place was hearing about so many folks who were who were afraid to disclose their queer identity in their senior housing. And so did go into kind of as on a fixed income, right? You have the limitations of that as an older adult. You go into senior housing, and then you're afraid to talk about your gay identity, and And as Portia has said in a conversation she and I had before, de-gaying your unit itself, and kind of the emotional burden and the trauma of that as well. And so I had someone I talked with said when she went to visit her friend in the senior housing, she's got this e-scooter, right? And it's just decked out with rainbow flags. She's considered the king of dykes in an area of LA, and she had to take off all the rainbow flags on her scooter in order for her friend to feel safe with her visiting, so she wouldn't be outed, to the staff, and potentially wouldn't get the care she needed to survive, right? The basic needs. So I think, aging is hard enough without these added layers of bigotry. We think about gender and then queerness. So I'll just start with that those are kind of a few of the things I've been thinking about. Yeah.
Thanks, Marissa. Sharon?
Well, one thing I wanted to start out by saying is when you introduced me, you mentioned the organization I belong to, and you did what a lot of people do. When saying our name, you said we were the older lesbians organizing for change, but we're not that. We're old lesbians organizing for change. And one of the things we try to educate about is claiming the word old, not as a dirty word, not as a 3-letter word that's bad, but as a positive. And one of the things we do in our organization a lot is try to raise consciousness and turn things around, like other movements, other minorities have done by changing labels from, what's assumed a stereotype, a negative stereotype, to something more neutral or positive. So I just wanted to put that in there.
My bad. Yeah.
Yeah, we're not.
Thank you for
we're
that.
not afraid. We're not afraid of the word old, but a lot of people do shy away from that. And even in the anti-ageism, in the movement, I'm forgetting her last name is Applewhite. I don't know if you're familiar with that name, but she's a straight woman who started this whole movement around ageism and fighting ageism. Even in that movement, they shy away from the word old. And so we go way back to the I think it was 87 that OLOC, Old Lesbians Organizing for Change, started a movement, started our organization. And I think, and also I was involved in doing research early with my she became my wife of 45 years, where we worked together doing research and gathering data on women in later, lesbians over the age of 60. And one of the things that we found out was that coming out is essential in getting the needs met that are the unique needs that you're talking about for lesbians per se. Because if you're not out, then people aren't going to, your caregivers or your service providers aren't going to treat you any differently than they treat a heterosexual couple. And you're certain, your inner needs, your more soul-based needs are not going to be met. So we found out, of course, most of the surveys are done by lesbians and gay men and others who are out, because if you're that closeted, you probably aren't going to offer yourself up for a questionnaire or that kind of a thing. So I think that Portia's idea of an LGBT senior center is a great idea. It's an idea I had myself back about 10, 15 years ago. I started thinking about how important that would be. But as time went on, I realized that our gay center in Los Angeles was really taking over. I mean, they started out being very youth oriented and were ignoring a lot of the needs of us elders. And this was, a problem. But now they've kind of gotten it all together. And I myself wouldn't mind living in their latest residential facility, which they've created on this, campus in Hollywood, in the East Hollywood area, that has a residence for, I don't remember, over 120 units, and as well as all these services that are part of the community, including dining services and food. They actually have a food market down there where they train people to become professionals in the food industry. So they've got a lot of things covered. I never expected it to kind of happen that way. But I do think that another thing I wanted to bring up was practically every lesbian that I've ever met or dealt with, either in the interview context or just on a personal level, we're pretty feisty people. We're pretty, I don't want to say the word combative, but independent minded. And so if anybody is trying to start as an organization or as a governmental agency, some kind of an entity or service to provide something for us, you have to take into consideration the fact that a lot of the women that you're dealing with are leaders themselves. They do not want to be told how, what, where, when something's going to happen for them. As a matter of fact, the philosophy of the OLAC is that it's up to us to define our destiny and to control our own lives. And we kind of demand that kind of respect from others. And we try, I mean, there are a lot of housing options that OLAC members, I should say, or participants have been involved in, and strategies for finding housing where they can age in place successfully and are aging successfully in certain places. Now that needs to be tested. I mean, I don't know that there have been evaluation projects done on these various mobile home parks that are around the country that serve lesbians. But I've certainly heard a lot of anecdotal reports that are positive, where lesbians seem to want community with other lesbians. Or, when we interviewed them originally years ago, they didn't know that these kinds of places existed. And they said, well, where is one? Is there a retirement home for people like me? And can I expect this? And, they didn't know it was happening. And when they found out it was, and that there were such facilities or places or compounds, some of that kind of a thing, co-op housing, they were excited about it and said, yeah, I would really, like to consider that. I think aging in place is a great idea when it works. The problem is poverty, when people can't keep up with the standard of living. And in today's society, it's pretty difficult. If you're living, as Marissa mentioned, one example where the transportation wasn't there, I think it would be great if a LGBT senior center had a van, or if the gay center, I don't know if the gay center in LA has this sort of provision. I doubt it, but a van that could pick people up for doctor appointments and and social events that are important. That would be something that we really need. Um, whether we control the service or not, but lesbians need to be let into I mean, OLAC believes we don't even allow researchers to come in and gather data from us. And well, I happen to be the research gatekeeper. So I evaluate what's coming in, and people can't even do the research unless they um, come forth with certain criteria, meet certain criteria that we expect. And one of the things that we encourage is that they involve lesbians who they want to interview in the thesis, the development of the thesis idea from the very start, so that they don't get, really off track, so that they brainstorm. And of course, I help them do that too. And I'm, an old lesbian, so I give them input, try to get them to pick a topic that we feel is relevant for us. And so there's, a lot. I think there's a lot of uniqueness, not only in the needs, but in who we are as old lesbians.
Thank you, Sharon, and all the panelists for sharing your insights. I do not want to control this conversation, so please chat amongst yourself. Marissa, Portia, if you want to respond, please do that. We have some more time to discuss this. I just want to throw out a very quick observation that we talk about queer aging in place more broadly, right? And I'm glad that Sharon, you brought the focus on lesbians. So I want the panelists to share with us how is, we're all under one umbrella, the queer folks, but we have different needs and aspirations. So is there any uniquenesses around old lesbians aging in place that you'd like for us to hear about?
One thing that concerns me is that as we are aging in place, and that's the ideal, no one wants to wind up in a nursing home, but as we are aging in place, we have to make sure somehow that we take into consideration not only the fact that we're older and gay, but we have to, how do I put this? The intersectionality between my gayness and my Blackness, or my gayness, someone's gayness and their Jewishness, or the upper socioeconomic gays, the ones that got the money and think that this isn't something that they need to worry about as they get older. They're going to need to worry about it. That money ain't going to protect them. But even still, their needs are different from somebody who lived a life as say a dishwasher, or a drag queen that didn't have health insurance, or there's all these things that need to be taken into consideration. And this is one reason I love the idea of a senior center, because it can address everyone's needs. We have in the community so many different organizations. Like here in Dallas, we have something called the Resource Center, and it's mostly dealing with men with HIV. Then we have in South Dallas, we have an organization called Abounding Prosperity, and it addresses the needs of Black gay people, not necessarily older gay people, but we have all these different organizations, and no one knows where to go to get information specific for them. And none of these organizations really caters to the senior community. We're always a bythought. Even if they do have something that addresses the needs of seniors, no one knows that. So that's why I'm really fighting for a senior center that can be inclusive of all of our needs. You may not want to attend a program there. You may not want to interact with others there, but at least you know that I need some information about housing, or I need some information about where I can get assistance to repair my home or something like that. We will have all of that information in one place without you spending half a day on the phone. And also, I think every city government needs an LGBT senior liaison. I mean, we're not that proficient with tech. I mean, I'm not picking on you, Sharon, but think of what a hard time you had this morning just getting onto Zoom. Okay, that's the way a lot of us had to communicate during the pandemic. And we just became even more isolated. I was going around and teaching people one by one, teaching my cohorts one by one how to access Zoom or how to do the telehealth with their physicians. So we just need some place where we can have our needs addressed and have maybe youth, young people volunteer to help us with learning how to order groceries online, things like that. I think that what Marissa is doing is so super amazing. I mean, she's highlighting all of these issues that have plagued us for years, but it's coming to a head now because we, my generation, the boomers, are the first generation of gay people that have lived their lives out and proud. And now we're terrified, I know I am, of having to go back into the closet and live dependent on somebody who may want to spit on me as I'm in my wheelchair and I can't get up and knock the hell out of them because I'm too old. And I'm sorry, wait, I got to rein it in. That really frightens me. I mean, and it's an issue that keeps me awake at night, even though my wife is 20 years younger. I mean, I've got so many friends that I had a friend, as a matter of fact, he was my best friend. He became sick a couple of years ago, not anything life-threatening, but it was during the pandemic, and he was terrified of having to go to a rehab center and subsequently committed suicide because he did not want, he was afraid of how they would treat him. And for some of us who obviously, if you look at me, the first thing that's going to come to your mind is either gay or dyke or butch or whatever. Some of us don't assimilate very well into the general population. And I am what I am, and I'm not going to change that. So it's something that so many of us think about. And frankly, a lot of us are thinking we would rather be dead than have to deny who we have been all of our lives.
Well, I have to applaud what you're saying. I've lived through some of what you're saying with my wife of 45 years. I had to get different caregivers come, and we had insurance that paid for some of it, but that was another problem. The whole issue of having long-term care insurance that doesn't really come through for you. But anyway, that's another issue. But we had some religious type caregivers who came from a accredited service organization, and neither of us were religious. We're Jewish, but we're not religious. And it was hard to take. And at certain, if you're sick, and she was very sick, she was terminal, and you have people talking to you about Jesus, that isn't what, we're looking for. And it's on top of having to need the care, you have people with their, idiosyncrasies. And sometimes it's hard to screen for, how do you say, well, we want a gay friendly person. When you're in crisis, it's hard to even think up all the things you need in terms of who the person is. And you can't really do that because you're not allowed to discriminate. And I guess that's a form of discrimination if you say you don't want someone who discriminates or is not sensitive. And we did get a few gay caregivers, but to get the whole package is very difficult. To get someone who could really identify and have empathy. And caregivers, caregiving is a major issue. And I love your idea about since it was my idea too at one point, of having a central place that has the information and referral services. That's so important because there's so much overlap in the information sharing part of this. But I don't know if it's my turn to talk, but I did want to say something about the queer aspect of this, the queer identity, because a lot of us lesbians don't identify as queer. And also, and that is an umbrella, and I'm concerned about it being an umbrella because when it comes to research results and analysis, if you don't differ, I saw something recently said that 26% of the LGBT queer community is in poverty. Well, I want to know, well, how many of them are lesbians? How many are gay men? How many are trans? How many are drag? You know what I mean? You can't just give out a number. And what I'm concerned about is the erasure of the lesbian community who've already been downgraded in terms of wanting to identify as women. And all of a sudden, the term pregnant, you can't say the word pregnant woman because now men can be pregnant. And so it's now persons. And things like that it takes a while to process that concept. But I'm not saying we can't or we won't, or some of us have, or, the younger generation of younger generation, the next generation of us old folk will be different. And one of the questions in terms of all this identity issue that's come up and the change in philosophy and looking at gender differently, trying to get rid of gender basically, and gender identity. Destroying that also is helping to destroy our history, the history of lesbians in the world, and from way back in in ancient times, where we had this Amazonian kind of way of thinking. What will will that affect aging? I really wonder. Will it affect how we are served, the services we get in some intricate, complicated way that I can't really predict? I think it can and will. Also, there could be a revolution the other way, a backlash, I guess you'd call it, where lesbians take their own power again, assert themselves. And because I think a little bit of that is happening and saying, we want to be visible too. We're not, because there's something about queerness that makes us invisible. Because, gender's not important, women's not important. So queer is important as And to be honest with you, a straight person can be queer now. That's true. So how do you meet the needs of gay people who are really have an identity as that, it's same-sex couple love? That's who I'm really focused on and who I want their needs to be met. And they can't meet them if they don't have a label. If we don't have a label, I don't see how you can meet the unique needs. Anyway, that's my spiel.
Well, yeah, I want to jump off of some things that Sharon was talking about with kind of really like the tremendous self-determination within the lesbian community, and how there has been, I mean, the informal care work that goes on among the lesbian community and communities of color in particular, I think is absolutely, incredible. There's some folks someone I talked to who, she traded in her minivan or her sedan to get a minivan so that she could fit all of her friends' walkers and wheelchairs into her car to then be able to take them to their doctor's appointments and deliver them dinner and whatnot. But that's also, a lot. Like, she was extremely, I think, like, it was a, like, she saw it as like a duty, and that she, like, somewhat, appreciated to be able to be there for friends, but also it can be a huge burden when there's not the agency there to support friends, in different ways. And as Portia and Sharon have said, in the case of this person's friends, I'll call her Jo, her friends are terrified to take any sort of transit service to get to their doctor's appointments or anyone they don't trust. So I think, Sharon's idea of having some sort of LGBTQ transit service could be incredible, especially because transit does pose, far greater risks for gender minorities and then older folks, and then you compound mobility problems. It just exacerbates it further. And then I found also, the connection between transit and loneliness is really quite substantial. That if there is poor quality transit, then folks are going to be more likely to stay in their houses and not engage with the surrounding community. And so I think, good social connection, can actually enable good transit services. And but this is all to say that I think, yes, that there is tremendous and vibrant informal care networks happening among the lesbians I talked to, and there are some really great opportunities for, I think, policymakers and planners to be supporting these efforts in creative ways, right? That I know I talked with some folks at the LA Department of Health and Human Services, and basically, like, they can fund these big organizations, but they really struggle to fund smaller grassroots groups. And so I think there's so much to be done in terms of redistribution that hasn't been tapped, right? Of how can we, as Sharon has mentioned, with OLOC, there's a lot of, for good reason, gatekeeping in the community. There's a lack of trust. The threats of harm are real. And so there are community leaders who do have the trust of this, in a lot of ways, hidden communities. And so how can we redistribute resources to the folks who already have the trust in the communities, whether that's these LGBT centers, whether it's groups like OLOC, frankly, that have these, chapters in different regions, who can then distribute something like, like a respite program, right, to people who need to have a break and have been vetted by groups like OLOC or something like that, or their service, SAGE, service advocacy for gay and lesbian elders, right? And so they do a ton of trainings. How can that be a part of every senior center? In that, you know, there are a lot of senior centers in different communities, far more than there are LGBT centers. So kind of thinking about democratizing the resources a little more. I know I was really interested that really the only people, granted my sample is certainly not representative of all lesbians, but the only folks I talked with that were still organizing around lesbian identity specifically were Black lesbian participants. And they were creating this annual gathering through their organization called Black Lesbians United. And they had previously been organizing partly meeting in these Black gay bars. And they would meet, you know, before they opened at night. And so when the bars closed, they were kind of scrambling to find where they were going to meet. And so there are real, you know, spatial implications to the closure of these bars, right? Having certain spaces. And so now they do an annual retreat in a campground. And so natural resources were a huge asset for a lot of the people I talked to. So what would it look like for, you know, the National Park Service has an LGBTQ heritage initiative, but how could they, you know, train park rangers to also make these spaces more accessible for communities of color, queer folks, older folks, in ways that aren't just for young, able-bodied, straight white men kind of thing. So I think I'm kind of listing a laundry list of things I've just been thinking about, but I think there are real ways to address needs that policymakers and planners have a unique role to play beyond kind of zoning reform as well. So I'll pause there.
Thank you, everyone. Marissa, you actually started discussing the second question, which is very good. We're going to launch onto that, the role of policymakers and planners. But this is a very rich conversation, especially for me, since I haven't heard perspectives such as these, even within gay men. You know, so the point that I was going to want us to spend a little more time is the point about informal care work, Marissa, that you mentioned. And yes, it's vibrant and robust and laudable and everything, but it sort of, you know, lets the state off the hook, because they then begin to rely on personal unpaid labor and all that's emotionally, you know, emotional burden of populations who are already burdened for, you know. So I want us to discuss a little more on that, because I think that does have planning and policy implications, as you just noted. The other thing is, what I'm hearing from all of you is that that we need some sort of anchor institution for these populations that you know assists with a whole range of services, probably, right, that Portia mentioned. So I'm also curious if you know of such institutions around the world that are successful, that are doing their job, that are, you know, meeting the community needs, unique needs, especially. And if you want to share that with the audience, that would be great. And one final thought was what Sharon mentioned, the need, you know, how the inner soul-based needs can be met. I thought that was very powerful. Right, we can provide logistic services, but how do we meet inner soul-based needs? And I keep hearing from my friends who are aging older that, you know, queers are lonely in their old age. And I asked them, are they? And they said, well, they don't have family visiting them. Generally, most of them don't have kids. They don't have kids visiting them in the old home. So their experiences of aging is different in that sense. So sorry to be throwing this many thoughts out at you, but anyone, you can, you know, Sharon, if you want to go first, we can start with you since you can't see any of us.
Oh, okay. Well, I was thinking of the name Marcy Edelman, who's the commissioner on aging in the I think she's a state commissioner on aging, but she's done a lot of research. She did a lot of original research around the same time mine and I were doing our work. And one of her books that came out was called Long Time Passing. And I know that she's done a lot of training of caregivers up there in the Bay Area. And she also was responsible for creating housing, or, institutional based, federally funded housing in the Bay Area.
Yeah,
That
open,
I think, yeah. So I can't. Oh well, it used to be called. Gee, I'm blanking on the name right now.
open house,
Open House. Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So they actually, I think that they started out doing the training, and they've trained, a lot of people around California, professionals on all levels. So, and somehow I think it's built into state policy now that her group, I mean, it's not just her, it's her organization that started this. And it started out as a quest for housing. And and then she realized she needed information and referral aspect to it, and she needed the support services. And she couldn't get everything she wanted around this one particular housing program, but she has been able to get educators and gerontology educators who are gay to help pass the message that gay people are in nursing homes, that gay people, that we're there and we need respect and we need to be treated equally. There is the whole sensitive issue is, what do you do if someone's in the closet, because so many have to go back in the closet just because of the way communication within a nursing home or in a retirement home goes on among straight people, among the heterosexuals. They don't often, include us in their conversation, or think to include us in their, there's always, well, before we could get married, it was, they're just talking about grandkids. And so many of us at that point don't have grandkids. But now don't have, grandkids. And that's what they talk about. That's the currency of exchange in many nursing homes, is who's your grandkid and what's your grandkids, what are they doing? And also the grandma syndrome that Barbara McDonald, who wrote Look Me in the Eye, brings up that everyone has to be a grandma. And if you're old, you are a grandma. And you're even called grandma by some groups and people. When for many of us lesbians, that's not our identity and never will be. So now I'm off the point. I'm getting off the point, but yeah, I think there are a lot of service needs that should need to be inclusive of our philosophy, our way of our identity gets kind of pressed out, in a way, just by interacting with people who have, don't even, we're invisible, basically. I think Portia brought that out, that we're kind of, we're not only gray, but we're gay and we're women. And, that's a triple jeopardy. And if you're a different race, I mean, if you are, a minority group, then that's, a fourth stigma that keeps you more one down, or with a sense that you don't belong. And that's why I think belonging is important, and why so many of us old lesbians want to be together with each other, because we understand each other. they we understand, and we should never be tried to, we should never be separated. Or, I mean, there are some, I've been in situations where the expectation is that we have to be with gay men all the time, and we can't be separate. We shouldn't be, because the federal government, they even have told us that there's some policy that comes down from the feds that says we can't be separate in certain circumstances, or they won't get funding. And of course, mine and I fought against that, and we set up our own lesbian rap groups, and they worked. And of course, we also were open to having Thanksgiving with gay men and trans people, and that's no problem. But we want to be with everybody, but not all the time.
One of the things I think is so important, especially now that we're getting to have so much representation in politics and in the government, is we need to educate these gay politicians and gay senators and gay congresspeople that just because they weren't totally elected by gay people doesn't mean that they can't pay attention to our needs. They get in these positions, we support them when they're running for election, and then they get elected. And I say, well, not me personally, but usually, yeah, me. I say, well, what are you going to do for me now that I've gotten you in this position? And they respond, but I'm the congressperson for everybody. So I can't just focus on your needs. But darn it, yes, you can, because you are going to be me. In 30 years, you're going to be still fighting for the same things that I'm fighting for. So we need to make sure that they're educated on our needs and how to be sensitive to our needs without excluding the rest of their constituents. And that's part of the problem. Mm-hmm. They don't want to seem partial to gay people because they're gay. And I don't know how to get around that. And
yeah, they have too much power.
As to what to do about that. I mean, there was no problem. And forgive me if this is going to sound weird, but there was no problem when we began to have Black politicians getting elected and getting put on, become congresspeople or senators or things like that. And they were saying, we need to support the Black community because they're marginalized and they haven't had access to this. And they're talking about equity and all of that. But now we've got, it's going to be what, 30 million gay people, LGBT people by the year 2030 or something like that.
And it's growing.
All these gay politicians, and darn it, they're not doing anything for me. They're not helping us. And they need to be looking out for us. They need to be making sure that we have housing, that we have access to healthcare, that we have positions that are not discriminating against us and dealing with our breast cancer, because we have a higher incidence of breast cancer as gay women. And we have a higher incidence of it's either ovarian or uterine cancer, that we have mental health issues because of our orientation and our sexuality. They're not paying attention to that. And their excuse is, we have to look out for everybody. So I love what you're doing, Marissa, because you're putting a light, you're shining a light on these issues. And it may not be in time enough for me, but at least the generation after me you're making a difference for them. But speed it up, girl, because I want to, you know, I don't want to be in the nursing home with my cane going upside somebody's head.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I think like we don't really have time for building all these new developments and starting all these new things. Like that's why, you know, we got to think about these creative approaches to adaptation, and how to make places that already exist more affordable. You know, putting even something as simple as why aren't grab bars, you know, in every bathroom? Why isn't that just part of the building code? And I think, Portia, you're getting at a great point of yes, there are. It's so exciting that there are so many more queer people, LGBTQ folks in elected positions, and there are a lot of straight people who can also be advocating for us and for the community. And so, what you know, I think to Manish's point, you know, like if only it was not on the most affected people to be the ones educating and giving all of the information. I think also that's part of the problem with, I mean, that's what participatory planning, we really see a bit of a dead end there when thinking about it in terms of aging and the LGBTQ community, because participation and visibility, as much as it's, you know, Sharon's incredible work of consciousness raising and rap groups through OLOC and creating more awareness within the community for people to have the courage to be out. You know, for some people that's just not a reality, and they still need to get to doctor's appointments and feel safe finding, you know, meeting their basic needs. And so how can it, you know, how can there be some sort of shift of hearing the needs and having these kind of community leaders having a platform who do feel safe being out? How can they be funded by the city, right? Like, how can like folks like Portia, I don't know if you know, you're getting a stipend from the city, but like, how can you be, you know, someone like you, like be getting more, you know, financial backing to actually be, you know, doing this work that you're already doing, and hearing the needs of folks in the community, I think is really critical, which, yeah, again, goes back to the redistribution bit.
Marissa, I'm sorry, I forgot to mention that you live in LA with your wife. I forgot that you.
Oh, it's okay. No,
got
I'm up
married.
in Oakland now, anyways.
Oh, Oakland. Okay, sorry. So, anyway, this is a great conversation. In the last sort of 20 minutes, we've I'd like to hear from you. What do you envision for the future of aging in place for LGBTQI plus community, but specifically lesbians? Is there something like, if you had a magic wand, what would the future that's equitable look like? And thank you, Sharon, for bringing up belonging, because when we talk about equity and justice, we are not talking about belonging, which is so integral to well-being. And more recently, I'm only talking about planning, urban planning, which is my area. Urban planning has not critically engaged belonging, and I think it is something that planners have to really focus on, as part of well-being. And we're seeing conversations on well-being now at play, but not belonging so much. So anyway, how do you envision a future that is, for queer people and especially lesbians, for aging in place? So we'll end up with that conversation, and I think we have about 20 minutes for that. If anyone wants to get started, Sharon, you want to go first?
Yeah. Well, I live in Long Beach, so even though I'm aware of what goes on in LA proper, I'm in a small. I mean, it's a small city in a way, 300,000 or so. Not like 10 million in the so I'm in LA County, but it takes about an hour to get, like to the gay center or places like that. So I don't go very often. So we have a gay center, But for years, mine and I stayed away from the gay centers because there was so much sexism coming from the gay men. And there was so much priority at the time given to, VD and sexual issues that didn't really, I mean, mine have fought very hard for the gay center in LA to have a lesbian clinic and a lesbian gynecologist. She put that in there, and that happened for a little while, and it was great, and it was pioneering, and it was different, and I mean it met our needs. And then all of a sudden they got this grant, a federal grant, and they said, well, now you have to offer these same gynecological services to the surrounding community, the neighborhood that you're in. And the neighborhood happened to be, I think, mostly poor Guatemalan people, and they they gave them the services, and then the nurses and the doctors said, well, I do this all day long at work. I came here because I'm a lesbian. I want to serve lesbians, so I'm quitting. So that's the lesbian clinic no longer exists. Actually, I don't think there is a lesbian clinic anymore in Los Angeles, but as far as I know, and there certainly isn't one in Long Beach. But in terms of a vision for the future, I don't see, I mean, mine and I did make some changes at the Gay Center in Long Beach in terms of creating lesbian rap type groups and lesbian coffee hour and that kind of thing. We started a group called Les Chat. And then of course we attended the, we attended more inclusive events that happened, where there were the gay men and the trans people and everyone together. We did both, but at least there were still, we were able to be part of our own community, the lesbian feminist community. And although you could say, well, the lesbian have to be a feminist to be there? No, of course not. But there is this aspect to lesbianism where feminism is there, whether the word is there or not. And it means something. It means feminists have a vision. We have a vision, especially radical feminists, that sexism becomes eliminated and that we're allowed to be, to do all the things that we are doing. I think lesbians are very creative people, and we pioneered all kinds of things. Lesbian feminists did in that area of the area of women's health. We did a lot there. And in terms of changing how the doctors and nurses examined us gynecologically. Now, when you go into Kaiser and you need some kind of gynecological exam, you're allowed to examine yourself so that you don't have someone pushing on you. Some doctors learned what the Feminist Women's Health Organization pioneered, that there's certain ways that doctors act. They shouldn't act. They shouldn't treat women like objects, and would let us explore, who we are in our own ways and create, the vision of the Feminist Women's Health Center, which is run by lesbians, has still not become a reality. It's a little bit here and a little bit there, but the revolution and women's health in the area of gynecology is, to me, a medieval. It's for some reason we've invented all these great devices and x-rays and machines that do all sorts of things, but they don't help us. in certain ways. And lesbians are loath to go to gynecologists just because of that very reason, that we're treated in a sexist, backward, old-fashioned way. And so one of my visions is that would end, that this medieval practices in the medical profession end, and they start, I mean, they've done all kinds of, we have all kinds of technology and computer innovations. Why can't they use that on women's health and figure out ways not to torture our bodies the way they do now when we have cancer or related kinds of conditions, viruses and other kinds of conditions like that. So my vision is like, I can go to a gay center and not be treated or expected to behave in a certain way because the men are there. And not to, and not to be looked at as exclusionary or discriminatory because we want to be with other women. And of course, there is the kind of uncomfortable discussion that comes to the trans issue there. But I think by 20, 30 years from now, that will be a non-issue. Yeah, I'd like to see the vision that Portia has realized, where we have where the politicians and others pay close attention to our real needs and not destroy our community as it has been destroyed in a way by insensitivity and expectations that we change or be different from our roots, which is Amazon roots.
Portia, you want to respond?
The biggest thing I envision is accessible housing, our needs being addressed on a governmental level. City government, we pay taxes. Here in Dallas, they do a lot to invite big businesses to come to the city. And they have a lot to offer. But these big businesses have a lot of young gay people working for them. So we need for these young gay people to move here, want to live here, work here, grow old here, and die here. So give them something, give us something. Everything has to become more inclusive, and attention must be paid. The younger people, like Marissa, younger people need to realize that we's old and tired. We have been fighting, most of us for all of our lives. And all we need is for more young people to pick up the mantle. We've got marriage equality. We beat that rug. We beat that. So now these young people need to say, hey, you know what? These OGs, they got this for us. Now let's do something for them. Let's recognize, let's support them. Let's make sure that we get housing built some kind of way that doesn't involve federal fundings, so that the federal government can't mandate that X amount of these apartments have to go to straight people. In this country, we seem to be able to do everything else until it comes to the LGBTQ community. And speaking and addressing on the trans issue, and I know that's not a very popular issue with a lot of older gay people, but it's a very large part of my community here in Dallas. And we have to be more open and accepting. I mean, it's just the natural progression of things. And just like I am not going to feel comfortable going into a nursing home and I have to go back in the closet. Imagine a trans woman that has not had genital surgery, who's got boobs bigger than mine, in a nursing home, excuse me if that was offensive, but in a nursing home and has not had genital surgery. Imagine the pain she's going to feel and the comments she's going to feel. So, hey, in all these nursing homes that's popping up, let's have a few that's strictly for the LGBT community, where we are open and accepting of each other. You know, it's out of the box thinking, but out of the box thinking is what got the first people from the coming over to create the United States from Great England or Great Britain or whatever it was called. I mean, there was some point where they never would have thought that those people would come and found a country that eventually became bigger than Great Britain. You know, so why don't we utilize these great minds we have in the community to find a way to make us feel safe, secure, and still needed, because we can still teach our young people a few things or two, but you can teach us even more, because if we're going to survive, we need to know all this tech crap and so much other stuff. We just have to work together. So I guess that's my vision of the future. We're working together, the young learning from the old learning from the young, with a sense of respect, because y'all are babies. All of us that didn't have children, y'all are babies. And all of y'all that got kicked out of your homes like I did when I was 15 and didn't have parents that wanted them or respected them or loved them, well, we y'all's mama and daddies and grandmas and aunties and uncles. So that's the way I see it. Community and family.
Thank you. Thank you. Marissa, you have the last word before we open it up for questions.
Gosh, what a thing to follow, Portia. Yes. Just plus oneing that. I want to, and you know, I should have said this at the beginning, but I do want to take a minute to just thank Sharon. She had mentioned that she talks to folks who are interested in talking with OLOC members who are doing research, and that's how she and I met, and she's been a huge mentor in thinking about aging topics for me throughout my entire dissertation process and before even starting field work. So I just want to shout some gratitude to Sharon for the past years. Yeah, I'm really grateful. And yeah, I mean, echoing both, you know, what Sharon and Portia have said, I think, you know, we plan housing with the expectation that people are going to get up and move when they need additional care services, health services that they can't that folks can't provide for themselves. But that's traumatizing to get up and move, especially for queer folks, queer people of color who have spent decades cultivating relationships in these rap groups, affiliated with these LGBT centers, right? That really rely on these friendships and these friendships of support. So it kind of seems horrifying to then start paying someone else to provide some sense of security elsewhere. So I think, there's so much that can be done for building, designing, and placing housing in a way that's fit for across the lifespan. And so some of the leaders of Black Lesbians United were telling me that they're, every time they get together, they're thinking about co-housing. And I already mentioned, like, these developments take a lot of time, and a lot of people don't have that time. There's one co-housing, the first I've heard of, an LGBTQ senior co-housing community outside of Durham, North Carolina, where everyone has their own little cottage. And then in the middle, there is like some sort of center for everyone to go if they want to come together or have some sort of medical services or anything that resource that they might need. So that's great, and also a huge undertaking. And so the blue leaders that I was talking to were saying, like, we wanted to have our own walls and live independently when we were younger, but then now that we're older, we want to share walls. Some people do have kids, but kids aside, partners aside, like, we want to be there supporting one another. And maybe, we share some walls, and then hire one caretaker, but among the 5 of us, and then all of a sudden it's affordable. And also, you have your friends around you who can hold the caregiver, accountable to providing safe care. So I think there's so many things that we can think about with developing housing in more flexible ways. That's not just okay for the white, straight nuclear family who's young, and then you can't use stairs anymore. Well, that's your problem. I hope you have enough money to put in one of those electric chairs to get up those stairs. So I think there's, from the kind of housing development side, there's so much we can do to think about affordability and accessibility to stay in the houses that people want to stay in. And I think, this is also about, as Portia said, intersecting identities and context. It's about relationships in place. One of the participants I talked with, has affordable housing because she's friends with her landlord, and she would lose that housing if she got up and moved. And frankly, the only place she could afford would be an RV in the desert, right? So these are really, huge decisions that people shouldn't have to be making. And so I think, the other idea that some blue leaders had was applying to senior housing as a cohort, right? Why do you have to apply as an individual when maybe you have this group of friends, again, that you might have tremendous trust in? And so why can't you all apply together and move together into this space, and not have to decide between going into affordable housing and having your supportive friends around? And that can also push back against the loneliness that is a real problem. So I'll leave it there as, adapting, housing stock to support these kind of shifting living arrangements as people need, that can help everyone, right? I think it's like LGBTQ folks are thinking so creatively and have had to for so long, living outside of kind of straight spaces and straight networks. But these possible solutions will help, I think, everyone.
Thank you, and I appreciate Marissa, you pointing out that that the LGBTQ community has been almost forced to be creative, right? Because they didn't have the support network. So what do? They create their own systems and let the state off the hook some. But it's time now to be more demanding, perhaps, right? That as Portia was saying, this is the first generation of out queers aging, I'm guessing, right? So they have specific unique needs that we talked about. And then how do we get planning and policymakers to address that in meaningful ways, not just sort of, oh, we're doing this, something here, something there, but really putting their heads together to think about creative ways in which they can support this creativity, not co-opt the creativity and take away from it and bring in something really generic and bland and sterile, right? So how do they sort of support the creativity without taking away from the creativity? It's very tricky, but that's what we need to be pushing for, right? Don't tear down what has been built by this community, but support it in ways that takes some of the pressure and emotional labor and unpaid work out of that. And so I think we're out of time. So I don't think we have time to address the questions. I have to rush to a graduation. But thank you very much. I really learned a lot, and I'm going to follow up with some of you to refine my thinking about, I look at gay spaces. So I want to understand sort of the lesbian aspects of gay spaces more clearly. So thank you for including me in these conversations. I don't know, maybe I'll send you these questions eventually and see if you want to respond later, or I can just step out, and if you want to respond, Marissa, what do you want me to do?
Yeah, I have to go in a few minutes as well. I don't know about Portia and Sharon, but you can make me the host. Do folks I want to be mindful of people's time.
Yeah, right. I don't think there's actually only one question, so I can send you that later. Yeah. Okay, let's wrap up. Okay. Thank you again. And thank you for your time.
Thank you for inviting us.
Yeah.